Somebody's parakeet is speaking up there.
I was going to say we have a new guest this morning. How about that? You know, we talk about Rotary appealing to all ages, so types as well. Very good. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Lakeville Rotary, our virtual edition for Thursday, June 18th. Glad to have everyone here. Just a couple of housekeeping rules. Always a reminder that we are being recorded this morning on a video and audio. So remember that. Also, if you would please keep your mute buttons on while we are, if you're not speaking, that kind of helps everyone else be able to hear and to make sure that we don't have a lot of background static. Mr. Peterka, I was wondering if you would lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance this morning.
Would love to do that. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Greg.
You bet.
Mr. Bear, if you would do us the pleasure of your invocation, please.
Certainly. Thank you very much. I want to read something from the book of Isaiah that I think is really pertinent for all of us as Rotarians. And so let's bow our heads in prayer. This is Isaiah 60:1-2. It says, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon you. For behold, darkness shall cover the earth, and deep darkness the people. But the Lord will arise over you, and his glory will be seen upon you." So, Father, this morning, we, as Rotarians, we come together, and we thank you for the opportunity to gather as one body of 35,000 chapters and 1.2 million people that have a common goal of unity on earth. And we ask you, Lord, for the wisdom in these times. God, we feel called as Rotarians to speak the truth in love to our neighbors, Lord, and build a better world. We know that we can't do it alone, and we can do it only with you. So today, Lord, we ask for your strength. We ask for your grace. We ask for your mercy. We ask that you would guide us and our leaders, Lord, both in Rotary and in government. Lord, that peace would fill the land, and that we as Rotarians would shine bright for others to see the works that we do in bringing unity. I ask that you bless this time. Lord, I ask that you bless David Yorks and his message that he has provided for us today, that you would strengthen him and encourage him and each of us. Bless the food in our refrigerators, Father. Use it to our bodies to nourish us and strengthen us as you fill us and strengthen us spiritually. We just thank you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, Bob, for those inspiring words. Okay, do we have any guests other than Mr. Yorks with us this morning, Kathy?
We do not, unless there's someone else that I missed.
Okay, very good then. Well, like I said, welcome this morning. We're very privileged to have Mr. David Yorks with us, and we will get to his program very shortly. A couple of announcements. Everyone should have seen the note from Kathy this week on a couple of upcoming events on the International Virtual Convention and also on the installation of our new governor. If anybody is not getting Club Runner or the weekly update, by all means, please let Kathy know. And especially just a little kind of FYI on housekeeping. If you change your email, it always helps if you bring that to our attention, because basically in some cases the email has changed, and until and it comes back, and we really have no idea what how to get it forward. So just kind of keep that in mind if you're changing addresses or offices or things of that nature. Mr. Cooper, would you please give us an update on your activities with the blood drive? It helps if you take off the mute, Mike. There you
We're
go.
having our citywide blood drive on August 18th. You know, this will be our third annual that we've done this. Last year we had like 178 units of blood we collected. Our goal this year is to reach 300. Now that sounds not even possible, but what's different this year is we've included the school district. Cindy Nolan from the school district is working with us, and we've got both high schools involved. And we're now hoping that those students are going to get their parents involved. So it's going to turn out to be a big event. We're holding it at Juniper Commons. So just put it on your calendar. There's going to be more information obviously coming out in the next few weeks. We're just kind of kicking everything off. What's important about today, if anyone donates blood between now and August 18th, they would obviously be ineligible to donate at our drive. But anybody donating at Memorial Blood Center, if you tell them you want this drive to get credit for it, there's just a short form that you just fill out, and that gets included then as part of our blood drive count. So I wanted everybody to know that. Thanks. That's it.
Okay, Michael. Thank you very much. Thanks for all your efforts on that behalf. Rachel Marzon, would you like to give us an update on what's happening with South Metro and the Rotaractor activity? Is Rachel with us this morning? I thought I saw her.
Yeah.
Well, we'll come back around. I'm sure she's here. Richard, I think you have something to share with us regarding taste.
Oh, good morning. There'll be a short meeting afterwards. We'll promise to keep it short. So we'll start that a minute or so after we wrap up the meeting this morning. Over the last few weeks, we've been doing what I call Taste of Lakeville salvage operations, where we're trying to figure out what kind of things we can do to continue generating revenue and keep active with TOL 2020. So we pretty much scoped that out last week, and a couple areas that will impact the members are we'll be working with Lakeville Liquor to do wine judging boxes sold through a variety of ways, also with member support on that. Keep in mind with the members that Taste of Lakeville is our big fundraising item for the year, so it's a big hit not conducting it. We're looking for ways to generate these revenue. Another area would be with the auction, and a big Navy Bravo Zulu to Dan Emberg is stepping up to help us with auction. And Dan, did you want to share anything on some of the auction things we'll be doing this summer?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairperson, and thank you, Mr. President, for the opportunity to address the club. So just to give you guys a little bit of a state of the auction right now, we have approximately $2,600 worth of merchandise that has been donated by vendors and club members currently sitting in the Citizens Bank basement. What we're trying to do is get that number up to at least 20,000, and so that means we need some help from you guys. And so what we would like to do is have a larger amount of kind of bigger ticket items. Now, earlier this spring, we had collected a number of volunteers to put together group baskets to really try and have a higher dollar value. So you're going to be getting an email from me or Adam within the next couple of weeks, kind of describing what we're going to be looking for. You'll be put into groups, and what we'll ask is that you actually select who's going to be your contact person or your captain for that particular group, just so that we can track for all of these donations. So be thinking about how you can support the auction. We are going to move forward right now. We're targeting the 13th through the 19th of August for the online portion of all of these items. So we'll be in touch, but kind of picture in the neighborhood of $200 to $300 worth of items. And if you need to go in with another group member, that would be just fine as well.
Okay, thanks, Dan. So keep in mind, you used to have to sell 6 tickets, and that was 200 and change. So we really need the support with auction. It'll be a key way we'll be raising funds and replenishing the coffers. And thanks again, Dan, for stepping up on that. So that's a wrap, a taste of Lakeville. If you're on the committee or just interested, please connect in right after, or please stay on right after this meeting. We promise to keep it short and sweet. That's Taste of Lakeville. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. One quick question. I know I saw some email going back and forth last couple of days, and I've had a couple of questions from members. Do we have a process for refunding tickets that have already been sold to Taste? How we're going to handle that?
Yeah, that's one of the items top on the list to, I think tentatively we're going to refund them, but we'll be discussing that. We'll be making a decision on that at the meeting today.
Okay. So the message is stay tuned.
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. I know one of the things that we've talked about the last couple of weeks, and you've seen in your email from the district, is the foundation push for $400,000 between now and the end of June. So just to keep that in front of us, that is an objective that we're all trying to work on. We're close, but we just need your help, everybody's help, to get us over the line. Just for our information, the Rotary, Lakeville Rotary, we did meet our E-Ray objective and our foundation objective. Thanks for everybody for that. That was very gracious, particularly in this kind of environment that we're in today. But if you look at where we've been and what we've done since COVID, and a lot of the work we've done with the food shelves, we're in that period of time where everybody knew back in March and April, yes, we had an immediate need, but those needs are ongoing as we go forward right now. So if you get an opportunity, take a look at the email from Kyle Hagen. If you've got any questions at all, you can contact me or Kathy. We'll be happy to answer any questions you may have with regard to foundation. Another pertinent topic that everybody is interested in, I think all of us, is when we can meet in person and how that's going to look. And right now, as far as we know, we're still on track to do that in July at the July 9th meeting. Brackets has been just very, very helpful and flexible with that. They're still trying to work out the regulations in terms of how we can do that, but we'll obviously look a little different than what we've been before, but social distancing and safety practices are really driving that decision. So all I would say is stay tuned, and we will keep you up to date on that. Having said that, I hope everybody saw the note that we will have our first in-person, weather permitting, 501 next Thursday at Alibi. So we're all excited about that, and I know Lisa is happy to have us back as well. So put that on your calendar, and we will be happy to see you there. So I'm going to come back around. Is Rachel Marzon, are you back with us?
Doesn't look like it.
Doesn't look like it. Okay. All right. So before we move forward, are there any other announcements or questions we need to address before we get into our program today? Also, I would say before we get started, if you have questions for our speaker today, if you would put those on the chat, that if you would just send that up to Kathy, we'll be happy to. Kathy, can you handle that, monitoring the questions?
Yep, we'll monitor those questions as they come in.
I'm assuming we'll have more than a couple, so I think the best way to do that is just get them on the chat line and we'll go. So, well, our speaker this morning, we have heard quite a bit about. David Yorks is a award-winning speaker and scholar. He's also a lifelong resident of Minnesota. He's a graduate of the University of Minnesota with a degree in American history. And he has a very long interest. I guess it's okay to share that, David. It's been 55 years and counting. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes, absolutely.
Well, I know you have delivered this program in many different venues, and like we were talking before the meeting, there's certain ones of us of a certain age that basically witness these events and live through it. And it's always intriguing, I think, I don't think any of us ever thought that we'd still be talking about this this far downrange. So at any rate, we're very happy to have you with us this morning. We're excited to hear some of your updates and observations. So with that, we'll turn it over to you, Mr. David Yorks.
Thank you very much. Kathy, I go down here to share the screen.
That's correct.
Okay. There and there. We're good to go, right?
Yes, you're good.
Okay. Thank you very much for having me. I certainly appreciate the opportunity. And as Ken said, if you'd hold your questions until the end, we'll all be able to stay on track. Thank you. This morning, I'm not here to sell you anything. I'm not even here to convince you of anything. My job today is to present to you some information that you may or may not already know and present it maybe in a new perspective for you. And if at the end of my talk, you're driven to discuss any of these issues with others, then I will have succeeded. As you know, the title of my talk is the Warren Commission Report, Fact or Fiction? Let me give you my bias here right at the beginning, so you know exactly where I'm coming from. I believe, as do many others, that after more than 55 years of investigation, after new scientific information is available, and after hundreds of books and articles have been written about the Kennedy assassination, that the Warren Commission report, for completely innocent and benign reasons, is part fiction. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to present to you the results of two government entities that investigated the Kennedy assassination. The first government entity to do that was the Warren Commission. They spent 10 months investigating the assassination, and they released their report in September of 1964. 12 years later, the United States House of Representatives also investigated the assassination. They spent 31 months, and they published their report in March of 1979. In a few minutes, I'll give you the conclusions that those two government entities reached in their investigation of the assassination. In a few minutes, you will see that the conclusions reached are diametrically opposed to each other. They're 180 degrees difference. One would look at the two conclusions and say, gee, did these government entities investigate the same incident? In a few minutes, I'll give you that information and allow each of you to treat that information as you will. Kathy, I'm not able to forward this. Is there any reason why?
No, you have control.
Not reacting to my prompt.
Try the bottom left.
Sorry, there it is. There we go. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Who was the Warren Commission? Within days of the assassination, President Johnson formed a commission to sort through the intrigues and the mysteries surrounding the assassination. President Johnson hand-selected a bipartisan group of 7 to form the Warren Commission. These were all men, they were all attorneys. They were prominent, dedicated, responsible, patriotic Americans. The Warren Commission represented the best America had to offer. Of the 7 commissioners, 6 of them wanted nothing to do with the Warren Commission. Only 1 of the 7 actually wanted to be there. The reason is really quite simple. These guys all had huge day jobs. The last thing they needed to do was to take on an ad hoc responsibility in an election year. President Johnson had to convince, persuade, and coerce 6 of the 7 to serve. I'm going to talk to you about 4 of them. The first person that President Johnson had to convince to serve on the Warren Commission was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Earl Warren. Now, when we think about the Supreme Court, we don't normally think about politics. At least in 1950, we didn't. Today, of course, we do. Earl Warren did not fit that mode in 1950. He was a politician through and through. Earl Warren had served 3 terms as Republican governor of California, and in 1952, he ran for the Republican presidential nomination alongside of Dwight Eisenhower. During that campaign, Eisenhower went to Warren with a deal. If Warren would drop out and if Ike were elected, Ike would place Warren on the Supreme Court with his first opportunity. It's exactly what happened. Warren drops out, Ike's nominated, Ike is elected, and in 1953, the Chief Justice position opens up in the Supreme Court. Ike lives up to his word and puts Warren in the position. It's interesting to note, the years later, after Ike's presidency, in one of Ike's last televised interviews with Walter Cronkite, Walter Cronkite asked Eisenhower if he had any regrets as president. Eisenhower answered the question as he normally did. He didn't have to think about it. He didn't bat an eye. The question didn't faze him. Ike answered the question immediately by saying, and I quote, "The worst damn fool mistake I ever made was putting Earl Warren in the Supreme Court." The next person that Johnson had to persuade was the most powerful senator at the time, Democratic Senator Richard Russell from Georgia. Russell was chairperson of the powerful Senate Armed Services Committee and led the Dixiecrat coalition in the Senate. Russell hated Earl Warren. I read accounts where Russell refused to walk into a room if Earl Warren was president. Part of it was due to partisan politics, but part of it was also due that Warren led the Supreme Court to pass the Brown versus the Education Bill, or to make that decision. And of course, that integrated the Southern schools, and the Southern Dixiecrat senators thought that education in 1954 should be a states' rights issue. The next person that Johnson appointed was Allen Dulles. Allen Dulles was the director of the CIA under Bobby Kennedy. He was the director of the CIA under President Eisenhower, and then also under President Kennedy. Kennedy had to fire Allen Dulles as director of the CIA following the failed Bay of Pigs invasion. Bobby Kennedy went to Lyndon Johnson and lobbied to have Allen Dulles placed on the Warren Commission. Bobby knew that if Allen Dulles were on the Warren Commission, that Dulles would protect the Kennedy administration legacy by keeping nefarious activities that the CIA was involved in during the Kennedy administration. Allen Dulles became Bobby Kennedy's eyes and ears as to what was happening behind closed doors, just like Senator Russell became Lyndon Johnson's eyes and ears. The next person I'd like to mention on the Supreme Court, or I'm sorry, on the Warren Commission, was that highly ambitious congressman and always financially challenged congressman from Grand Rapids, Michigan, Gerald Ford. Gerald Ford was the only one of the 7 who actually wanted to be there. The reason being, Gerald Ford saw an opportunity to write a book as to what was happening behind the closed doors when the Warren Commission was over, and much to the chagrin of the other 6 commissioners, Ford did write his book. Ford lobbied his friend J. Edgar Hoover to be placed on the commission. Ford was Hoover's eyes and ears as to what was happening. Earl Warren did not like Gerald Ford. The reason being, Gerald Ford was buddy with Senator Richard Nixon from California. And in 1952, when Warren was running for the presidency, Senator Richard Nixon backed Dwight Eisenhower rather than backing the California favorite son. The Warren Commission operated under huge disadvantages. They had 3 large disadvantages. Number one, they didn't want to be there. They were serving reluctantly. In fact, at no time during the 10 months of the investigation and during the hundreds of hours of testimony, at no time were all 7 commissioners ever present together during any one given session of testimony. That included testimony from such notable people as Governor John Connally, First Lady Jackie Kennedy, or Jack Ruby. Most of the commissioners did attend about 50% of the sessions of testimony, Ford the most, Russell the least. Secondly, they had a time crunch and a budget crunch. Time-wise, Johnson wanted this done by June 1st. He did not want the results of the Warren Commission to become a campaign issue in the 1964 presidential election against Barry Goldwater. Well, they didn't make June 1st. They didn't make July 1st. They finally got the report on the president's desk on September 24th, 1964. Budget-wise, the Warren Commission was underfunded from day one. They were always searching for money. After all, they needed secretaries, they needed office space, they needed a travel budget. The Warren Commission was forced to make many decisions on the cheap because they didn't have the funds to do it better. And lastly, and most importantly, the agencies of the government responsible for finding out the truth about the assassination went out of their way to deceive the Warren Commission, to lie to the Warren Commission, and to withhold vital information from the Warren Commission. The reason was no agency in 1963 wanted to be blamed for the assassination of the president. I'm talking about the Dallas Police Department, the FBI, the Secret Service, the CIA, Navy intelligence. They all lied and deceived and withheld information. There are many, many, many examples of that. Let me give you 2 flagrant ones. The first is J. Edgar Hoover, director of the FBI. J. Edgar Hoover, director of the FBI, made sure that the Warren Commission did not know about the relationship between Lee Harvey Oswald and the FBI. They knew a little bit. They only knew 10, 15% of the true relationship that the FBI had with Lee Harvey Oswald. Hoover never told the Warren Commission that the Dallas FBI office and the New Orleans FBI office were neglect in their responsibility to place Lee Harvey Oswald in the Security Index Protocol. Had Oswald been placed into that protocol, he would have had a Secret Service agent assigned to him on November 22nd, 1963. Warren Commission didn't know that. I believe, as do others, had they known about the full extent of the FBI's knowledge and relationship with Lee Harvey Oswald, that the direction could have taken a different track or maybe different conclusions reached. Secondly, Allen Dulles, former director of the CIA and a commissioner, withheld from the Warren Commission the issue of Operation Mongoose. Operation Mongoose was a CIA initiative started under President Eisenhower and expanded under President Kennedy. The purpose of Operation Mongoose was to assassinate Fidel Castro, the president of Cuba. The CIA obtained funding for Operation Mongoose by going to billionaire industrialist Howard Hughes. The CIA subcontracted the actual assassination of Castro to the American Mafia. The American Mafia were only too happy to be involved with the CIA because one of the first things Castro did when he came to power on January 1 of '59 was to nationalize the Mafia's hotels and casinos in Havana, costing the Mafia family hundreds of millions of dollars. The CIA worked hand in hand with Mafia godfathers Santos Trafficante from Tampa, Carlos Marcello from New Orleans, and Sammy Giancana from Chicago. Warren Commission didn't know anything about the Operation Mongoose. Had they known about Operation Mongoose, their investigation would have taken on a different track, or their conclusions would have been somewhat different. Let me move the discussion now to the House of Representatives. 12 years later, the House of Representatives investigated the assassination. They spent 31 months rather than 10 months. They had many advantages over the Warren Commission, 31 months versus 10 months. They had all kinds of money. Funding was not a problem. And it took them 31 months, so they obviously had plenty of time. They also had new scientific information available to them. The Warren Commission used primarily the Zapruder film. Well, so did the House Select Committee use the Zapruder film, but in addition, by that time, they had two other films. They had the Nix film and the Murchmore film. So now they had three films from three different perspectives that could analyze what happened during those 6 seconds in Dallas. And they also had, very important, they also had an audio tape of the assassination. It just so happens that the Dallas motorcycle policeman following Kennedy's limousine, as they made a 120-degree turn from Houston on to Elm, inadvertently switched on his microphone. Therefore, the Dallas Police Department all along had an audio tape of what happened during those 6 seconds. They didn't know they had it. Years after the Warren Commission, as the Dallas Police Department were cleaning out some files, they came across this audio tape. So now the House committee had 3 films and an audio tape to analyze what happened during those 6 seconds. And lastly, of course, 12 years later, hundreds of books and articles had been written, and the House could gather nuggets of information from many different sources. So let me go to the meat and potatoes here. Warren Commission, 10 months, published in '64. The House Select Committee, 31 months, published in March of '79. Here are their conclusions. I've broken it down into 5 areas. First is the conspiracy in the assassination. What did the Warren Commission say? The Warren Commission said there was no conspiracy. The House Select Committee said, wait a minute, we disagree. We believe there was a conspiracy. We can't define it, but we believe there was a conspiracy. Meaning that the Warren Commission felt that Oswald was just a lone nut, and Oswald did this 100% completely, totally on his own. The House Select Committee said, well, no, we disagree with that. Secondly, the number of shots fired. Warren Commission says 3 shots were fired. The House Select Committee said there were at least 4 shots, meaning there could have been more than 4 shots. President Kennedy's autopsy. The Warren Commission said it was fine. The House Select Committee said, no, it wasn't fine. There are many, many excellent books written about Kennedy's autopsy on Friday night at Bethesda Hospital. Bobby Kennedy was in charge of the autopsy. Bobby Kennedy chose the 2 Navy doctors who he chose to conduct his brother's autopsy. It really wasn't an autopsy. It was a look through. Bobby Kennedy chose 2 Navy doctors who had never performed an autopsy on a gunshot victim. And those are the 2 doctors that presented to the world the autopsy of our fallen president. Jack Ruby. Warren Commission said Jack Ruby was like Oswald, just a nut, irrational guy who did some crazy things. And this was him walking into the basement on Sunday morning and murdering Lee Harvey Oswald in real time and on nationwide television was just one of those crazy actions. And that Jack Ruby had no mafia connections. The House committee said, wait a minute, we've looked at Jack Ruby's background. Not only do we believe he had mafia connections, but we have written a 1,044-page addendum outlining Jack Ruby's mafia connections. The last one, Jack Ruby and the killing of Oswald. Gee, Jack Ruby just was distraught and he walked into the basement and shot Lee Harvey Oswald. Well, the House Select Committee said, wait a minute, back in 1963, there was a long history of how the mafia took care of their problems. And that to the House Committee looked like a mafia's way of dealing with a possible informant. So those are 5 very interesting, I think, differences between the 2 government entities that investigated the assassination. I think you would all agree with me that both of these conclusions, sets of conclusions, can't be right. They can both be wrong, but they can't both be right. You can't have one saying there were only 3 shots and one saying there were at least 4 shots. Let me move into one other area and then I'll throw it open to questions. And that is, I think, a 6th reason that I believe that the Warren Commission is part fiction is when you look at Oswald's escape. In my mind, Lee Harvey Oswald did not act like I would expect a person to act who had just committed the greatest crime in the 20th century. We don't know everything that Lee Harvey Oswald did on November 22nd. We do know a few things. We know that on 12:30, the shots rang out in Dealey Plaza. Oswald immediately leaves the book depository building and walks up the street. He boards a Dallas City bus that would have taken him back to the book depository building. The Dallas bus immediately gets stalled in traffic. Oswald gets impatient and exits the bus. As he's leaving the bus, he asks the bus driver for a bus transfer pass. He's got that transfer pass on him an hour later when he's arrested. He then walks 4 blocks over to the Greyhound bus depot and hails a cab. As he's about to enter the cab, he notices a woman also wanted a cab, so he gives up his cab to the woman and waits for a second cab. When he gets into the cab, he has a cab driver drive him to his rooming house in the Oak Cliff section, about 5 miles away. When they get to the rooming house, Oswald has the cabbie drive him about 4 or 5 blocks past his rooming house and leaves him off at the intersection of Beckley and Neely. Oswald gets out of the cab at 12:54. We know it was 12:54 because the cab driver logged it in his log. At 1 o'clock, Oswald walks back and enters his rooming house. We know it was 1 o'clock because Earlene Roberts, the landlady, was watching the coverage of the assassination on TV, along with other residents of the rooming house, and they just announced the time was 1 o'clock. According to Roberts, Oswald walks in, goes immediately to his room without saying a word to anyone, and stays there for a few minutes. He then leaves his room, again without talking to anyone, and leaves the rooming house. A few minutes after that, Roberts looks out the side window and sees Lee Harvey Oswald standing at the bus stop across the street from the rooming house. The next bus would have been the 112, which would have taken Oswald back downtown where he had just come from. A few minutes later, she looks out the window and Oswald is gone. So if we put a timeline on that, let's say that Oswald was standing at the bus stop between 1:05 and 1:08. The next time we hear about Oswald is 1:16. What happens at 1:16? Well, about a mile away from the rooming house, at the intersection of 10th and Patton, a Dallas police officer, J.D. Tippett, is killed while on duty. Here's what happened. A Dallas resident driving in his pickup truck, coming up in a highly residential area, up in front of him, sees a Dallas squad car stop, and the police officer standing outside the driver's door, talking across the hood to another pedestrian. As Benavides drives up, he sees a revolver being drawn out. He pulls his pickup truck to the curb and hunkers down in the front seat for a few minutes while the shooting stops and gives the assailant time to run away. Benavides then rushes over to the fallen officer and tries to use the fallen officer's radio to call in the incident. He was not able to work the radio. He didn't know how to do it. Finally, another pedestrian came up named Bowley, who knew how to work the radio, and they called it in at 1:16. So we know the Dallas dispatcher got it at 1:16. When did the shots ring out? Benavides drives up, lays down in his cab, runs over, fumbles with the radio. Bowley comes in, calls it in. Let's say the shooting started at 1:12. So the question is, how did Lee Harvey Oswald get from 1026 North Beckley to 10th Street and Patton Avenue between 4 and 7 minutes? How did he get there? Well, we don't know. We know he didn't drive. Oswald didn't know how to drive. He didn't have a driver's license, didn't own a car, didn't have access to a car. He did not take public transportation. Researchers believe he didn't run. The running craze had not started in 1963, and seeing a young man in street clothes running down the sidewalk in a highly residential area in the middle of a bright, hot Friday afternoon, Friday before Thanksgiving, somebody would have noticed that. The Dallas Police Department, the FBI, and the Secret Service, all at different times, canvassed every single home, business, and community service provider in that area. Nobody has ever testified that they saw Oswald on the street. So the question remains, how did he get there? Well, during my many travels to Dallas, I've walked it. I've walked from 1026 North Beckley to 10th Street and Patton Avenue. Back in those years, I was running marathons, and while I never sped walked the distance, I always walked at what I considered a brisk pace. The distance is 9/10 of a mile. It's mostly uphill, highly residential and light business with a stop sign or stop light every block. Reminds me much of South Minneapolis. The fastest I was ever able to walk it was a little more than 14 minutes. An attorney for the Warren Commission, Bert Griffin, also walked it. It took him 17.5 minutes. How did Oswald do it in between 4 and 7 minutes? Well, the Warren Commission finally decided that Oswald must have walked at a brisk pace. Well, I suppose that's possible. I'll be the first to say that's probably possible. I and others just don't happen to believe it. So there are 5 reasons that we showed you that the Warren Commission differs from the House Select Committee, and now the 6th reason, Oswald's escaped. For those reasons, and knowing that the disadvantages that the Warren Commission had during their 10 months and the many advantages that the House Committee had during their 31 months, I once again say that for completely innocent and benign reasons, this group of patriotic Americans who wrote the Warren Commission report has some fiction built into it. With that, I thank you for your interest. Thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to take any questions or comments you might have.
Do we have any questions?
I guess just a short one here. If it wasn't Oswald, who would you, your theory is on committed the assassination?
Yeah, you know, Richard, there's lots of books have been written about that. What I personally believe, I believe Oswald had something to do with it. I believe Oswald is who Oswald said he was during his interrogation in the Dallas police office on Friday after the assassination. When Oswald said he's a patsy, I believe he was. I believe Oswald was set up. Who is he set up by? Boy, there's lots of reasons to point to anti-Castro Cubans living in America. After all, John Kennedy pulled the troops back from the Bay of Pigs. Big business. John Kennedy was going to do away with the oil depletion allowance, and Texas oil men needed that depletion allowance to turn a profit. John Kennedy, of course, squashed the steel industry when they tried to raise prices. There's an awful lot of reasons that many different groups could be responsible.
We have a question in the chat box from Peg. She wants to know, did the Johnson ever indicate that the communists were behind the assassination?
Thank you for the question. That was Lyndon Johnson's #1 persuasive argument for the 7 commissioners to serve. He actually put his arm around Earl Warren and said, if you don't chair this committee, being the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, I can guarantee you we're weeks away from World War III. So yes, he used the communist ploy strongly to form the Warren Commission.
David, I had a question. Looking at the both the House Select Committee as well as the Warren Commission report, do you have a feel for which ones were actually grounded in evidence? Because it certainly seems like there's still a lot of speculation, a lot of things that were kind of left unresolved.
Yes, thank you, Ken. There are many things still left unresolved. And the House Select Committee certainly had its faults that I didn't have time to go into. They weren't the perfect committee, but they did reach different conclusions than the Warren Commission. It's interesting, the last group, government entity, that investigated the assassination was the Assassination Records Review Board. And that has a Minnesota connection. Minnesota federal judge John Thunheim was chairperson of the Records Review Board. The Records Review Board started under Bill Clinton and ended under George H.W. Bush. The review board would go into the FBI and other government agencies and demand to be shown all of the secret documents that were still in the hands of the agency. And the Records Review Board took place about 10, 12 years ago. And they spent a couple years doing this. They'd go to the FBI and they'd say, okay, FBI, you've got this many documents that we think should be made public. The FBI would say, no, we disagree. We think only this many should be made public. When there was a discrepancy between the agency and the Records Review Board, the only person that could break that discrepancy was the president. In all cases, Clinton or Bush, they all voted in favor of releasing the document. Therefore, after 4 or 5 years of the Records Review Board pulling out secret government documents, they pulled out more than 5 million pages of documents that had been classified as secret. That's not to say that there still aren't millions of pages that government agencies have in their files about the Kennedy assassination that they're still keeping as secret. This chart shows you all the government entities that have investigated the assassination, and the Records Review Board, I guess they were started in '92. That was the last one that has gone through it.
Interesting.
Hello.
Well, do you have?
I can. Thank you for your information on the Johnson. I've never heard that before. I had suspected it. The reason I suspected it is that him holding that conclusion is the only explanation for his involvement in the Vietnam War. Vietnam was to get even with the communists for killing JFK, as far as that's my theory, but I'd like to hear your thoughts.
I think there's a lot of people that would support that theory. You got to understand that President Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson were from two different worlds. President Kennedy was, at that time, a young man, a progressive, on his way up. He came from one of the wealthiest families in our country in 1920, maybe one of the wealthiest families ever in our country. Lyndon Johnson, his father was a dirt poor farmer in West Texas. Lyndon Johnson was a protege of Franklin Roosevelt. John Kennedy did not think highly of Franklin Roosevelt because Franklin Roosevelt took John Kennedy's father to the woodshed after John Kennedy's father had pro-Nazi feelings during World War II as ambassador to England. So there was a big difference in how Kennedy and Johnson looked at the world. Johnson looked at it really communist versus Western. Kennedy was in the process of coming together with Khrushchev. And Kennedy's peace speech in June of '63 talks about moving the world closer together rather than further apart.
Any other questions for David? Yeah, it sounds like that from your perspective, David, there's still a lot of questions to answer and a lot of work to be done. So we'll be interested in hearing your progress or lack thereof going forward. So it's a real pleasure to have you with us this morning. One of the things we always do is for our speakers who are gracious enough to share their time and their information with us, we always have a honorarium that we make on their behalf. So this year, our partner is 360 Communities, so we'll be making a contribution in your behalf to them to commemorate your visit with us this morning. Thanks again for your presentation, and thank you for sharing. Very, very interesting.
Good. Thank you for having me. I've enjoyed it.
With that, we have time for a few happy dollars. So if anybody has any happy dollars to share this morning, if you're happy, please let us know.
I'll throw one out there. I've got a happy buck. I just got back from the Boundary Waters, and 2 of my teenage kids were kind enough to tag along. We had a great time.
How was the park? Was it everything open? Was it busy, Jim?
You know, oddly enough, it was busy. We were in a part of the Boundary Waters where I would have expected fewer people. We ended up on a lake because we were going to do some bushwhacking into the PMA. And so I figured that there would be fewer people where we were going to be, but it was pretty full. Talked to the outfitter I've used for 35 years, and they'll have a down year, but he too is surprised at how busy it is. So the folks that enjoy the Boundary Waters are clamoring to get up there. Yeah.
That's why I was curious if they I know they had some specific regulations around that. So I'm glad to hear that at least they're getting back to some level of normalcy. And like you said, when you can have your teenage kids go do anything with you, especially a experience like that, that's great. Congratulations.
Hey, Ken, I'll share a happy dollar on behalf of Scott Miller. I just got an email from him last night that his wife, Mary, was testing to be a kidney donor for her brother, and the donation actually happened yesterday.
Oh, yesterday.
And, evidently it had gone well, and they are down at the Mayo, and she is recovering now. So
great news. You know, I always think that's one of the more selfless acts you could ever do for somebody. So congratulations for them. Anybody else this morning? Well, and I don't hear the parakeet, so I think we're in good shape there. So anyway, I think we're running just a little bit past our timeline. So just a reminder for Richard that we will have a short meeting afterwards for Taste of Lakeville. And with that, let us always close our meeting as we usually do with the four-way test. Of the things we think, say, and do. First, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendship? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? Thanks, everyone. Go make it a great day. Have a great weekend.